thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and a privilege to present a recap of the ACC's Door to Balloon Alliance for Quality initiative that we initiated in 2006, and to discuss how professional organizations can make a difference. Dr. Wilson mentioned this meta-analysis performed by Dr. Keeley in 2003 that showed that primary PCI makes a difference for ST elevation myocardial infarction. This is a meta-analysis of 23 trials over 8,000 patients. It showed that the short-term death was reduced by an absolute risk reduction of 2% by primary PCI over fibrinolytic therapy. So this slide shows that the difference disappears if the PCI-related delay is greater than 60 minutes. This is a meta-regression analysis by Ramaji Nalamotu and colleagues that showed the PCI-related time delay on the x-axis and the absolute risk difference on the y-axis. And as shown, the improved mortality with PCI disappears if there is a 60-minute time delay. So if you add that to approximately 30 minutes that it takes to do fibrinolytic therapy, you end up with 90 minutes, and that's the origin of the 90-minute time frame. In 1999, the guidelines said that a door to balloon time of less than 90 minutes plus or minus 30 minutes was the standard. But in 2004, the standard was tightened up, making the door to balloon time of less than 90 minutes with no wiggle room. And in fact, in those guidelines, the Class 1 recommendation with level of evidence A stated that STEMI patients visiting to a facility without the capability of expert prompt intervention with primary PCI within 90 minutes of first medical contact should undergo fibrinolytic therapy unless contraindicated. In other words, do it right or don't do it at all. Firming up the 90-minute time frame for door to balloon time. But this slide showed evidence from the NERMI database in the United States. It showed the percent of hospitals meeting a median door to balloon time in green less than 90 minutes, in yellow 90 to 120, and in red less than 120. And you can see shown here that from 1999, 2000, 2001, and 2002, it didn't budge. We weren't doing particularly well. In fact, less than 40% of patients had a median door to balloon time of less than 90 minutes. So a famous American pragmatic philosopher said, there can be no difference anywhere if it doesn't make a difference elsewhere. The guidelines were meant to make a difference, and yet they didn't make a difference in practice. So, and in fact, looking at hospitals across the country in 2005, there was substantial variation across the country in door to balloon time in hospitals across the country. So the question was, how do the hospitals that do extremely well, how do they do that? How do the best hospitals do it? This became the object of an investigation by Betsy Bradley and Harlan Krumholtz and others at Yale. Dr. Wilson mentioned this study. It was called a positive deviance approach, where they identified the top performing hospitals in the country. They studied them qualitatively. They went in and asked questions about how they did it, and themes arose. And from those themes and those conversations, they were able to generate hypotheses about top performance. They were then able to test those hypotheses quantitatively in a national sample of hospitals. And from that, they produced this paper that was produced in the New England Journal in 2006, which showed that systems of care were important for activating the cath lab, systems for handoff from the ED to the cath lab, systems for interaction with the emergency medical system, and systems for data feedback and analysis. These systems were important for achieving optimal door to balloon times. And in fact, you don't put a minutes saved on each one of these strategies, and there were key strategies that were associated with reduced door to balloon time. Dr. Wilson mentioned these already. If the emergency physician activates the cath lab, it's associated with 8.2 minutes saved. A single operator call to the interventional cardiologist, 13.8 minutes. Pre-hospital EKG, 15.4 minutes. Cath lab expectation to be there in 20 to 30 minutes, 19.3 minutes. Real-time data feedback, 8.6 minutes. And attending cardiologist always in the hospital, which is unrealistic in most hospitals, but that was also associated with a 14.6 minute time reduction. So guidelines tell us what to do. We decided that we needed to tell hospitals how to do it, and we could use the research from Betsy Bradley and Ron Krumholtz's study to tell us how to do it. So we designed a national door-to-balloon time campaign to get the appropriate amount of visibility nationwide and to foster the unique organizational commitment in hospitals to achieve these goals. So first, we designed the initiative. There was a period of concept development. We had the initiative approved by ACC leadership. Fortunately, Harlan Krumholtz, who did the underlying research, agreed to be the chair of our national initiative. We developed 5 work groups, had 22 volunteer leaders, and incredible ACC staff. We developed toolkits, change packages for each hospital. We developed websites, webinars. We recruited strategic partners and recruited hospitals to state ACC chapters. This is the timeline that shows how we did this, from the time that the project was conceived to the time that the project was launched. Each one of these is a month. It was a total of 11 months from concept for the project conception to the time we launched it. And so I can tell you that when we launched it in November 2006, it was a little bit like building an airplane as the airplane was running down the runway. We were getting things built at the very last minute, but we were able to get the thing off the ground. We reached out to a number of strategic partners, including the American Heart Association, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and 39 others. Our goal of this project was to achieve a door-to-balloon time of less than or equal to 90 minutes in greater than 75% of the patients in participating hospitals. By encouraging hospitals to use evidence-based strategies, which were to for the ED physician to activate the cath lab, one call to activate the cath lab. The cath lab would be there in 20 or 30 minutes. We would have prompt data feedback for people involved in the process, senior hospital management commitment, and a team-based approach. An optional approach was to activate the cath lab based on a pre-hospital EKG. This shows the enrollment of hospitals from 2006, the fall of 2006, until 2007. And ultimately, we had over 1,000 hospitals nationwide enrolled in our project, out of roughly 14 hospitals in our country that perform primary PCI for acute STEMIs. We also had hospitals in other countries, in Spain, Saudi Arabia, and also in China, who participated in our door-to-balloon time initiative. We did make a difference. This slide shows from 2006 to 2008, we shifted the distribution of the hospitals achieving a door-to-balloon time of less than 90 minutes to the right. A higher proportion of hospitals achieved a door-to-balloon time of less than 90 minutes in this very short time frame after initiation of the initiative. This slide shows the percentage of patients with door-to-balloon times within 90 minutes from 2005 to 2008, showing an increase, a steady increase in the percentage of patients with door-to-balloon time of less than 90 minutes. This slide shows the change in door-to-balloon time in participating hospitals compared to hospitals that weren't participating in the initiative. It was a little bit hard to do because there were only 400 hospitals that were not participating. But the slope of the line in the hospitals participating was significantly steeper than the slope of the non-participating hospitals when adjusted for teaching status, number of beds, ownership, and regional location. This slide shows nationwide Medicare data in the United States from 2005 to 2010. The initiative came out in 2006, and so you can see that there was a sharp improvement in the door-to-balloon time from 2005 to 2010. And as Dr. Wilson mentioned, in our country now, it's the percentage of patients receiving a door-to-balloon time of less than 90 minutes in the United States is now around 93 to 95% nationwide. So we did make a difference. You recall that before the initiative, we were pretty flat. Things weren't happening. But then after the initiative, things started to move upwards with a dramatic improvement in door-to-balloon time. So there was a study by Dan Denise that was published in the New England Journal that showed that there was no decrease in mortality, despite this decrease in door-to-balloon time. So what we were able to do, and Brahmaji now led this study that was published in Lancet, we repeated that study. It was using NCDR data on 150,000 procedures that were performed from 2005 to 2011. This, in the filled-in markers here, it shows that the door-to-balloon time steadily decreased from year to year, but there wasn't any apparent decrease in mortality shown here on the y-axis. When you look at average door-to-balloon time across the entire population, and you look at mortality. How could that be? Because we know that door-to-balloon time, rapid door-to-balloon time, is supposed to save lives. Well, ends up from 2005 to 2011, we saw a 55% increase in the number of STEMI patients that were treated with PCI. And there was an increase in the age and the risk factors among those patients. Those patients were not the same patients. Patients who weren't going to the cath lab before were now going to the cath lab in large numbers. Patients who may not have even made it to the cath lab before now were making it to the cath lab. And so when you look at the patient-specific door-to-balloon times, which is shown here on a year-by-year basis, you can see that there was a dramatic decrease in mortality based on the door-to-balloon time when you look year on year. And when you look year on year, you see a steady increase in the slope of these lines, indicating that patients were sicker with each successive year that we looked at this. And so there was definitely a decrease in mortality based on improved door-to-balloon times. This slide shows the predicted mortality from a multi-level model over a range of patient-specific door-to-balloon times. You see, when you look at population door-to-balloon times, you can do something called the ecological fallacy, where you can make an assumption about what's happening at the individual level based on what's happening at the population level, and that can lead to an incorrect conclusion. But what you can do if you're looking at patient-specific door-to-balloon times and model this using hierarchical modeling, you can see that there is a relationship between the door-to-balloon time and mortality for in-hospital mortality and 6-month mortality is shown. When we polled patients that participated in our door-to-balloon time initiative, we found that there was a high penetrance of active senior management support, both emergency medicine cardiology physicians were on the team. There was a high degree of team stability, strongly committed physicians, and a high rate of physician champions participating in the hospitals that were participating in our door-to-balloon time initiative. So comparing hospitals in our door-to-balloon time initiative and hospitals who weren't in the initiative is a difficult analysis to do. There's a volunteer bias because the hospitals that participated in the door-to-balloon time initiative were not allocated to this that group randomly. They volunteered, and so we may have been choosing hospitals that had that were more enthusiastic about door-to-balloon time. There was a spillover effect in our country during the time period of the door-to-balloon time initiative. Everyone knew about this. It was a highly publicized event, and so the hospitals that were participating also knew about the kind of things that we were trying to do for the hospitals that were participating, so there was certainly a spillover effect. There were other environmental influences at the same time. There was pay for performance initiatives. There were public reporting of door-to-balloon times, and so there were a lot of things going on at the same time. So it's very difficult to link the intervention and the observations to try to determine the cause and effect. But nevertheless, when you look at it from various points of view, when you look at the fact that there was very little improvement from years on end, and then finally after we did the door-to-balloon time initiative, there was a dramatic improvement in door-to-balloon times nationwide, I think we can conclude that the ACC-sponsored National Door-to-Balloon Time Initiative did, in fact, make a difference. Of course, there are challenges that persist, and Dr. Wilson mentioned these. At the top is shown, and this is from Tracy Yang's study in 2011, showing data from 2005 to 2007. You can see that the distribution of patients who had directly arrived in the hospital was already starting to improve, with most patients getting a door-to-balloon time of less than 90 minutes. But the transfer of patients remained a significant problem. The average door-to-balloon time for patients who arrived directly at a PCI-capable hospital was 79 minutes, whereas the door-to-balloon time was 149 minutes from the first door to balloon time in these patients. And you can see that the door-to-balloon time for the transfer patients persistently remained elevated. So challenges remain in our country as around the world about patients who are present to non-PCI-capable hospitals. And so this Mission Lifeline and the STEMI Accelerator Program, as Dr. Wilson mentioned, are very active at trying to address these problems. In my own state, in Virginia, we have the Virginia Heart Attack Coalition, which is a coalition of the American Heart Association and ACC, the Emergency Medicine Association in our state, and a number of other stakeholders to try to improve the transfer times and to try to improve STEMI regional systems of care. So, in conclusion, research has shown us how to improve door-to-balloon times. Based on that research, the ACC created a door-to-balloon time initiative. The initiative required leadership. It required effort. It required buy-in from state chapters, from interventional cardiologists across the country, engagement from hospitals, hospital administrators across the country. But through this initiative, we were able to spread the evidence-based strategies leading to organizational improvements at the hospital level that appeared to have a dramatic effect on door-to-balloon times. Door-to-balloon times did improve nationwide dramatically. Lower door-to-balloon times were associated with lower mortality. And so, in summary, I think we can say that professional organizations can make a difference. Thank you very much for your attention.
So, John, you were intimately involved in this, and particularly the Virginia data were very good. And one of the things that might be of interest to the audience is the way that this was done through ACC, is some of the regionalization utilizing chapters. But how might one leverage that experience to what goes on in China, for example, on the provincial level? Is there an opportunity to leverage our experience and how that was accomplished to regionalization in China, but also the use of not just door-to-balloon time, but door-to-needle time for those areas that don't have PCI availability?
So, Rick, thanks for that excellent question. We greatly utilized an asset of the American College of Cardiology. That's the state chapter system. And we used the state chapter system to sign up the hospitals in each state. We created a little bit of a competition, actually. Each state competed with one another on trying to sign up hospitals in the state. In my own state, I was the governor of our state chapter at that time. We had 100% participation of all the PCI-capable hospitals in the initiative. And so, and then we also, at state chapter meetings, we talked extensively about this initiative. So we were able to reach out and develop, I think, better engagement of individual hospitals by having a regional approach as well as a national approach through this initiative. So the structure, the national structure of the ACC in the United States through the state chapters, I think, was was a key way of doing this. It was a little bit of like a political campaign. It was organized about like a political campaign with sort of a hierarchical structure for this campaign. And we had a national initiative, but each state had its own initiative as well that was able to push this through.
Terrific. Well, this has been, I think, for me, a very enlightening and interesting session that has focused principally on systems of care. And I would believe that you would agree with me, Mr. Co-Chair, that what we've looked at, whether it was for chest pain or systems of care in China, door-to-morning time or city networks, is that trying to organize in a systematic approach how to deal with these patients up front, based on local hospitals, but also regions, can dramatically improve processes of care. But it has to be organized up front, and it has to involve not just your own hospital, but your regional hospitals and your systems as well. Any closing comments? Thank you very much. We certainly appreciate your attendance.